Most of the stories for this video are from the book A Fire Cannot Kill a Dragon, which is a collection of interviews behind the scenes of Game of Thrones, and I also looked at other miscellaneous articles. As a disclaimer, since I'm going to be focusing on a lot of bad things that happened on set, that doesn't mean that every day it was a miserable time for the crew. So with that out of the way, let's start with any injuries or harm that came to the crew and actors. Since I put Septo and Nella getting waterboarded in the thumbnail, we can start with that and jump around to other stories afterwards. To preface the scene, Cersei destroys the Great Sept and captures Septo and Nella. For this scene, surprisingly and shockingly enough, the Mountain was supposed to rape Unella, according to Hannah Waddingham, who plays the character. Which sounds like one of the worst scenes that could have possibly have happened, but instead, they opted to torture Unella by waterboarding her with wine. And fun fact, Hannah wasn't even told about this change until she was in costume and lying down on the stone slab. David and Dan walk up to her saying, "Look, the script said, Cersei empties the remainder of her glass of red wine into Unella's face to wake her up, but fans are going to be expecting more brutality towards Unella, so it needs to be a full carafe of wine." Which is a pretty messed up change to make the day of shooting. Hannah details the events. "We then spent the whole day with me being waterboarded. I'm not exaggerating when I say that, other than childbirth, it was the worst day of my life." They then proceeded to do that for 7 to 8 hours, and after the whole ordeal was done, she had bruises all over her body and lost her voice from screaming. So basically, she got tortured all day under the guise of acting, also that David and Dan can get a quote-unquote realistic scene depicting torture. Which is weird because you can easily execute torture scenes in numerous different ways that don't put the actor's health and well-being in danger. Going all the way back to season 1, poor old Hodor endured a back injury. Christian Narn says, "I got a back injury that season I'm probably going to have for the rest of my life. My first day was the scene where Tyrion gives Bran the plans for the saddle. They had me carry Isaac up and down the hall 74 times. Probably halfway through that, my back had given up." The fact that they had to do that 74 times is absolutely insane, and I don't even know how the first season had the budget to do the scene that many times. Let alone the fact that the shot where he walks in was very brief, so that seems absurdly unnecessary. Christian Narn continues, "I was afraid to say no. It was my first day on set, so I couldn't not do this. It's my own fault for not being honest. You wanted to appear bulletproof." So even though it's partially Christian's fault, it's so unreasonable to want the actor to do that many times. And he could be over-exaggerating about carrying Bran 74 times, but he did give a specific number and got injured for it. For the scene where Tyrion, Catelyn, and Bronn are riding up to the Vale with a cliff next to them, an extra in a suit of armor almost got thrown off the cliff by his horse. Peter Dinklage says, "We shot one scene on horseback on the side of a cliff during a serious windstorm. The horses were very nervous. One guy was thrown from the horse just literally a couple feet away from the edge of the cliff. He then sat there motionless, and the entire crew thought that the man was dead, until finally he moved a couple fingers. After that moment, Michelle Fairley recounts Peter even asking if the horses were trained. Peter also says, "So that was a bit difficult in terms of like, life and death?" For another big horror story that you may have heard of is that Emilia Clarke suffered from a brain hemorrhage after season 1. She went through surgery and afterwards she had trouble even remembering her own name. But regardless, just a few weeks later she went back to filming. And to add on to that, the doctor told her that there was a second growth on her brain that could pop at any time. Emilia said, "It was crazy intense. We were in the desert in a quarry in like 90-degree heat. And I had the consistent fear that I was going to have another brain hemorrhage. I spent a lot of time just being like, am I going to die? Is that going to happen on set? Because that would be really inconvenient." She was also heavily fatigued during this period and even needed an air-conditioned car on set. So the fact that Emilia was able to endure all of this while delivering reams of Dothraki in blistering heat is crazily impressive, and I admire her so much. For a few small stories that I'll bang out quickly, the King's Landing set for the Iron Throne Room was ironically really cold, and one of the handmade actors wearing a toga passed out from being so cold, which is ironic given that King's Landing is supposed to be pretty warm. Then, in season 3, during the scene where Jaime Lannister is in the mud getting beaten up by Locke, Nikolaj Coster-Waldau had one of his ribs broken. Nikolaj though wasn't that upset about it because it was an honest mistake and it was just a misjudged kick. Then there's also the time where David and Dan put a baby on a real block of freezing ice. When asked why they couldn't have just used fake ice, they said, "Fake ice in close-ups just never looks real." despite them barely putting any emphasis on the ice since it was briefly shown in like 2 shots. Then, as you know in the scene, the Night King has to interact with the baby and touch him, thus making the baby scream on set, and David and Dan realized they were traumatizing the baby. After that, David and Dan were really insistent on seeing the baby's penis to prove that the baby was a boy, which was both really weird and made the mother uncomfortable. I don't know why David and Dan would want that so much when it was told to us the scene prior that the baby was a boy, so you don't need to show his privates. Moving over to the Battle of the Bastards, Liam Cunningham, who plays Davos Seaworth, almost got decapitated by a Russian crane arm while he was on his horse. He says, the horse wanted to play with its mates and ride off. He jumped 2 feet to the left, and the camera went straight over where my head was. I could have been decapitated, but I ducked. The crew were horrified, but luckily he wasn't injured. There was really no one at fault in the situation since horses can be unpredictable. Since we're on season 6, Sophie Turner, who plays Sansa Stark, was told not to wash her hair for long filming periods, since she's supposed to look dirtier given that she doesn't have access to a castle. She said, "It is the most amazing feeling to have a shower after you go a week, and you have snow and mud and horse shit, and all these disgusting things in your hair." To me, it seems like overkill to force your actor into bad hygiene when you can easily fake that with makeup and wigs, but Sophie Turner didn't seem that upset about the situation. Moving on though, since that isn't too crazy, during the scene where Lancel Lannister chases a kid into the catacombs during the Trial of the Seven, Eugene Michael Simon, who plays Lancel, was forced to crawl through bat shit since there were bats down there. Also, keep in mind that his spinal cord was severed, so he was only allowed to crawl with his arms and upper body for the entire duration of filming. By the end, I was so exhausted and I was literally frothing at the mouth, and the ground was covered in blood, shit, sweat, and a few tears. That doesn't seem too bad, but there's an additional thing that happens that pushes this occurrence over the edge a bit. They put petroleum on top of the wildfire. When the fire went off, it burned off my eyebrows and I could smell my own burnt hair. I just feel bad for the poor guy since this was probably his final scene, along with Hannah, who plays Septa Unella. Moving on to something bigger, for the action set piece where Euron Greyjoy ambushes Yara and Theon's fleet, the entire sequence was filmed pretty chaotically. It's detailed that the ship was on a rig with big water cannons shooting massive swaths of water at the actors, on top of fire getting shot out as well. Obara's stunt double even had her wig caught on fire. And to add on to all of this, the floor was made out of unstable balsa wood. Jessica Henwick, who plays one of the Sand Snakes, said, "At least 3 crew members fell through the floor because some of it was balsa wood so you could smash through it, but it wasn't marked off. So occasionally, you would just hear a yelp as another crew member fell through." Which to me is pretty wild and seems like some kind of safety violation. So with all that in mind, the actors were also required to fight viscerally and were even criticized for not having enough energy. Gemma Wellen, who played Yara Greyjoy, was hospitalized during the fight sequence. Although there aren't any details as to why she was hospitalized, it could really have been a number of things at this rate. Also, in this sequence, Jessica Henwick gets choked to death with a whip for her death scene, and it did not go smoothly according to her. She said, "There was an accident where Pilo almost freaking choked me out with my own whip. Then they were shoving me onto a forklift and hoisting me up there. They wanted to tie me there and put pressure around my neck. As soon as they put me on it, I was like, get it off, get it off, get it off." So yeah, that entire sequence did not go very well. While filming Beyond the Wall, Rory McCann, who plays Sandor Clegane, had to carry a real person on his shoulders that played a captive wight, and at one point, he fell down and hurt his leg. Rory says, "I had this guy on my shoulder for days and days. It didn't work with a dummy, so I had to carry a real guy and we had to run and run." Which I feel really bad for him because a lot of the shots where he's running, he's generally in the background, or there isn't a lot of focus being put on him. So it doesn't seem like they needed to have a real person be on his shoulders for most of that time, and if you really did, just make it a real person during the close-ups. For this story, it'll make any guys watching very uneasy, but Kit Harington's right testicle got caught on the dragon rig when there was a scene where he almost falls off in the first episode. Kit says, "My right ball got trapped, and I didn't have time to say stop, and I was being swung around." So that's not exactly what you envision when riding a dragon. Next, let's get into the Battle of Winterfell and how crazy this entire shoot was. If anyone doesn't know, the Battle of Winterfell was an 11-week night shoot outside in extremely cold temperatures, along with it being windy. Everyone involved said it was one of the hardest experiences they've ever gone through and was a massive endurance test. But I'll later on some extra spicy events that made the sequence even harder to shoot. So to start, the production was hit by 2 polar vortex storms that drastically reduced the temperatures. One scene in which Ser Jorah was defending Daenerys, it was impossible to shoot because they couldn't light a trebuchet in the background on fire because the gas fire bars were impossible to light from how cold it was. Also, if it wasn't hard enough, they shot episode 4 simultaneously during the filming of The Long Night, because episode 4 shared similar sets in Winterfell. So they opted to shoot episode 4 scenes during the day and episode 3 scenes during the night. This led to many essential crew members working on both the day and night shoots. Some crew members were even clocking in 40,000 steps on their pedometers, which roughly equates to 20 miles a day. Then, for any scene that wasn't filmed outside during the battle sequence and was instead filmed in studio, the filmmakers had to recreate the fog of war effect inside, which entailed using real smoke burning paraffin and fish oil. Crew members were breathing it in, and one person had to go to the hospital for having an asthma attack, and other people were coughing up fish wax, on top of everyone having red eyes from all the smoke. Then people were also getting an intense flu, and the producers were using the motion capture stage as an infirmary of sorts. Emilia Clarke even got sick, stating, "Everybody in the room was effed. I was incredibly ill on the back of the dragon. Then the dragon started to malfunction a bit and you just try to hold on." Then lastly, I was saving the worst thing that happened on set, which was a major injury from the stunt actress named Casey Michaels, where she suffered a serious fracture dislocation to her left ankle. The stunt was performed when whites were falling off a ridge into the Winterfell courtyard, and this required multiple stunt people to fall into the same set of cardboard boxes. Casey claims that the cardboard boxes were pressed in from the people falling on them before her, which led to her injury. Meanwhile, the production company claims that she fell vertically, which was the reason why she got the injury. And this isn't some small ordeal. This lady can barely walk and carry out ordinary activities. And because of this, she's suing the production company for $5 million, and it's currently unresolved. But yeah, these were all the major reported incidents I could find on the Battle of Winterfell. There are some other behind-the-scenes horror stories like the first version of the pilot that had to be mostly reshot, but 2 other channels made big encompassing videos on that went into depth, so I don't want to make anything that's overly redundant in that area. There's also some other brief problems like how the episode Blackwater lost its initial director just a few weeks before filming, and Kit Harington having to film scenes in season 3 with a broken ankle. But to cap off this video, David and Dan were notorious for carrying out some big pranks on their cast members, primarily in the form of fake scripts. There are quite a few of these instances, but 2 stand out to me that I want to mention. One of these occurrences happened to Kit Harington in season 1, where he fights a white for the first time to save Jorah Mormont. David and Dan wrote the scene where instead of Jon burning his hand when picking up the torch, he instead catches his hair on fire and it all burns away, leaving a bald Jon Snow with major scarring all over his face. Weiss told Kit Harington that HBO were worried that Jon Snow's storyline was too Harry Potter and they wanted to do something to make it darker. The messed up thing to me is that David and Dan ran with this joke all the way up until filming the scene, making it to where they made Kit believe he would be playing a disfigured character for the rest of the show, and he would be bound to a makeup chair for many hours. Luckily though, Kit was a good sport about it, but the same couldn't be said about Liam Cunningham, who plays Davos. For this instance, David Benioff wanted Davos to have a crush on Missandei when they first met, and Liam was not happy. Liam said, "I fought them. I'm not effing doing it. It's the only thing I ever stood up to them on." The woman is a goddess, but with Davos' history with Lyanna Mormont and Shireen, you can't have him getting the hots for a young woman. He then went on to say he wasn't 100% sure if David and Dan were actually kidding, and I love that he was genuinely uncertain about that fact, kind of alluding to their incompetence at writing. But if they were being serious, then that would have been atrocious. So thank God Liam stood up to them on that issue. Liam further says, "You're not undoing my hard work and gendering the sympathy of the audience to have him be a perv." So from this air of doubt established between fake script pranks and actors genuinely not being sure if the scripts were real, most actors thought the season 8 scripts were fake. Since these stories are a bit more popular, I'll run through a few quickly. For Isaac Hempstead Wright, who plays Bran, he legitimately thought it was a joke that he became the king. And Maisie Williams initially disagreed with her character getting the final blow on the Night King. Along with those facts, the Season 8 scripts essentially gave Emilia Clarke an existential crisis because the character she idolized suddenly turned into a villain, which even she didn't see coming. Emilia said, "I cried when I read the scripts. It was an effing struggle. I left the house and took my keys and phone and walked back with blisters on my feet because I walked for hours." Conleth Hill, who plays Varys, also famously did not like the Season 8 scripts. He says, "At the time, nothing could console me. I kept thinking, what did I do wrong? You couldn't help the feeling that you failed in some way, that you hadn't lived up to the expectation that you didn't know about." He also admitted after this that he was okay now, but he did say that his character dropped off a bit in terms of quality. Overall, these are the main findings I found through the book Fire Cannot Kill a Dragon and other sources. And there are other minor problems that I skipped over that I don't think are really worth featuring. Thank you for watching, and if you're at all interested in the making of Game of Thrones, then check out Fire Cannot Kill a Dragon.